thanks to all of you for being here this afternoon for this very, very special occasion. This event is designed to engage all of you, our faculty, our staff, our students, in a conversation around some of the recent events that have challenged our perceptions of race in America, especially the shootings at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. We're very pleased to be able to introduce to you today Reverend Dr. Gregory Groover, Sr., who's the pastor of the historic Charles Street A.M.E. Church in Roxbury. He's truly one of the pillars of the African American community in Boston. He's a graduate of Morehouse College in Atlanta, where he majored in sociology. We can claim him because he's an MSW from Columbia. He has a master's in divinity from Union Theological Seminary and his doctorate in ministry from the New York Theological Seminary. In 2011, he received an honorary doctorate from Northeastern. Reverend Groover is deeply involved in the greater Boston community, and he's past president of the Black Ministerial Alliance. He has served on many nonprofit boards in Greater Boston. He was chair of the Boston School Committee and is currently on the board of the Boston Foundation and the board of the Massachusetts Society for the Prevention of Cruelty Against Children. Reverend Groover knew 2 of the 9 victims of the Mother Emanuel Church Massacre in Charleston, which took place on June 17th. During a prayer time, during Bible study at that church. One of the victims was Reverend Daniel Simmons, who was an associate pastor at Mother Emanuel Church, and he also knew Reverend Clementa Pinckney, who was both a pastor and a respected state senator. He was a pastor of Mother Emanuel Church, which is one of the most prestigious A.M.E. churches in South Carolina. Senator Pinckney was 41 when he was killed. He was married, had 2 children, and had served in the state Senate since 2000. These shootings in June and other recent events have caused us to re-look at our perceptions of race in America. We're very honored today to have this opportunity to have Reverend Groover with us to share his reflections and his unique perspectives. And we thank all of you for being here. Reverend Groover.
Good afternoon. I thank you, Professor McRoy, for those very kind words and your warm welcome. I deeply appreciate it. And I'm also honored to say that I'm just glad to be here today at the School of Social Work and to be part of this very important bearing witness event. I want to thank Dean Cadonzi. Close. I've been working on it all day. But I want to thank you, Dean, for inviting me, and Professor Klein for recommending me, Christine McIntosh for giving me the script, and I followed it. And I also want to thank Professor Pitt Cassifis for having me. And finally, I want to thank all of you, the students, graduate and doctoral students, for putting up with me. I also acknowledge all of the faculty members, and I certainly acknowledge particularly one of my dear friends, Professor Tiziana Deering. Tiziana and I have worked on a very, very special, incredibly important endeavor in Grove Hall. And she is my sister who is involved with the fight, the ever-enduring fight of eliminating poverty. And so, Tiziana, your work, your legacy in Grove Hall still abides, and I want to thank you. I also, I think I see Professor Irvin Bloomer from the Lent School of Education, good friend of mine, and I also want to quickly thank, I walked in here with Professor McRoy and two wonderful and caring and welcoming and gracious students. And as soon as I walked into this room, there, as he is sitting right now, one of my parishioners, one of my members, who is not part of the Boston College community. He's a part of our church family. I don't know how he found out that I was speaking today, but he showed up. He's a student, a senior at Williams College, and he had to take a year or two off because of an accident, but he's here, and it just means so much to me. So Darryl Brown, it's a joy to see you as well. And then finally, I must acknowledge him. He doesn't know that I know him, but whenever I am in the presence of what the Black community and who the Black community affectionately and admirably regards as the Dean of Black Social Workers, Professor Charles Smith, you are a giant in our community, and so it's always good to see you, and I'm grateful for your presence. I begin my remarks with a confession that is anchored in deep shame and utter embarrassment. As I was reflecting the other evening on the Emmanuel Church massacre in preparation for my remarks today, I had to ponder very deeply and think hard just to remember that tragic occurrence. I had to sit for a while, a long while, and remain still and alone, just to be able to recall and zone in to specifically that June 17th unexplainable and mean-spirited atrocity that devastated us all. And here's what's so troublesome and embarrassing. The massacre only occurred a little more than 4 months ago, less than 20 weeks ago. A very short time that I would think that a horrific incident of this enormity would still be sharply vivid in my mind. And yet, in order for me to travel my memory back from late October to mid-June, I had to push my way through multiple layers of other senseless mass killings that developed and played out on the face of our national psyche just during the summer and early fall of 2015 alone. As I began this journey of recalling the Emmanuel Church massacre, my mind immediately first focused on the killing of the 9 students at Umpqua Community College in Roseburg, Oregon, by a young man with strong white supremacy beliefs, a tragedy that happened only this month. And once I got past that Roseburg, Oregon killings, staring right in my face was then the breaking news images of that August 8th mass killing that took the lives of 8 people in Houston, Texas. And even before the Houston, Texas tragedy, there was the Lafayette, Louisiana incident, where a gunman on July 23rd started mercilessly shooting in a theater, killing multiple persons who were simply watching a movie. And before I finally made it to Charleston on June 17th, my memory had to go through July 16th, when 6 people showing up to work at a military recruitment center would be slain in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Yes, all of those mass killings that took place only since the Emmanuel Church tragedy sort of makes June 17th seem like a long time ago. But the mass killings were not the only troubling phenomena that emerged on the stage of our national attention since June 17th. I'm going to get to June 17th. But on the political front, we've witnessed during this summer the startling and yes, frightening rise of Trump. And then in this fall season, even more terrifying, the ascent of Carson. And my prayer is, unapologetically, is that the disturbingly baffling advancements of these two racial justice unfriendly aspirants for the presidency will end up being nothing more than just succinct seasonal sensations. But even with politics aside, that's an oxymoron, isn't it? There were other horrific and dangerous incidents threatening the movement toward racial justice that took place within the short 4-month span between that Wednesday evening, June 17th, and today. I think of the church burning of Mount Zion A.M.E. Church in Greeleyville, South Carolina, and the church that was put on fire in Macon, Georgia, that was called God's Power, Church of God in Christ. And then the fire that was set on Briar Creek Road Baptist Church in Briar Creek, North Carolina. And then the burning of Glover Grove Missionary Baptist Church in Warrenville, South Carolina. And then there was the blazing of the College Hill Seventh-day Adventist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. And then the senseless scorching of Fruitland Presbyterian Church in Gibson County, Tennessee. And still the burning down of the Greater Miracle Temple Apostolic Holiness Church in Tallahassee, Florida. All African-American churches senselessly set on fire in these past 4 months. And besides the church burnings, I think too of the numerous accounts of police brutality against black teens and young people that are still taking place even after Ferguson, even after Baltimore, Melissa, even after Waco and New York. Incidents that have been reported since June 17th of this year. Incidents as recent as just 5 days ago, when a 14-year-old black female teen in Columbia, South Carolina, was treated as an animal as she was grabbed from the back of her classroom by a white deputy sheriff, pulled out of her desk, slammed to the ground with the desk still on top of her, and then thrown and dragged across the floor by the officer. And so when I tried a few days ago to first remember and reflect on the Emmanuel Church tragedy that happened just 4 months ago, my mind had to travel backwards, pressing through all of those incidents that have played out on the seemingly unending and countless news cycles just to get to June 17th. Numerous tragedies beyond count that makes the Emmanuel massacre seem so long ago. And yet it was not. And I do remember that Wednesday night, June 17th. Because like Pastor Clementa Pinckney and the others at the historic Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, I too attended Bible study that night. I too, with the numerous members of the historic Charles Street A.M.E. Church in Grove Hall, Roxbury, we gathered for our Wednesday midweek prayer service, as all A.M.E. churches do on Wednesday night. I know why Pastor Pinckney and why Reverend Daniel Simmons, my friends, and the other members of that Mother A.M.E. Church in South Carolina, I know why they were there on Wednesday night. Because for them, and for the thousands of A.M.E. congregations, and really for the tens of thousands of African-American congregations all across the country, church has never been And in 2015, it's still never just a Sunday morning experience. Unlike perhaps other cultures, we do not have the luxury of church sufficiently just being a Sunday morning gathering. We would not survive as a people if we only made it to church for 2 hours on Sunday. While we are filled up, and while we are renewed and with the resurrecting power as we leave church on Sundays, and we're ready to go out and face another week, by midweek alone, we as African Americans are already tired and spent and downtrodden from having to confront every day the many oppressive forms of racism. By midweek, we have already been spiritually bruised up, psychologically scarred, and morally injured by having had doors closed in our faces, having been denied opportunities that we know we're ready and more than qualified to take on, having our character and our names always in question, and having to prove ourselves simply because of our race. And so by midweek, we are once again weary and tired and empty. By Wednesdays, our tanks need to be filled again. And so we can't wait. In fact, we will not last for Sundays for our refueling. So on Wednesday evenings, after being beaten and battered and buked by the overt and covert faces of racism, we make our way to church, our spiritual gas stations, to be refueled, to be prayed up, to have our souls encouraged, to tell each other, hold on just a little while longer, to remind each other by studying the Bible together, by praying and testifying to each other that despite how often the many agents of racism and perpetrators of injustice try daily to demean us, that there is a God who sits high and looks low, and who loves us and considers us somebody special. That's why Pastor Pinckney and his congregants were at Emanuel AME Church on that Wednesday night. Emmanuel, the mother church of over 800 A.M.E. churches in South Carolina. Emmanuel, the church that for many generations has stood as the refuge for the city's African Americans during slavery, during Reconstruction, and the Ku Klux Klan era, and Jim Crow, during the Civil Rights Movement, during the reemergence and the raising of the Confederate flag, and finally the taking it down. Emmanuel, which in Hebrew means the house of God. The Liberator Church that was the meeting place for organizing one of the largest slave rebellions ever planned. Emmanuel, the church that, because it strategized the insurrection, was burned down to the ground by the white slave masters, but was rebuilt the next generation by the children of the slaves. Emmanuel, the holistic saving station for the city African Americans that has sponsored over the decades literacy classes, employment training, housing referrals, counseling, and other essential services for all who need and all who are in need who walk through the doors. The church that provided spiritual makeover for the hundreds that attended services every week and who need a rebuilding of their self-esteem and their confidence and their renewed hope that their troubles won't last always and that better days are coming. And Emmanuel, a majestic cathedral-like edifice with a high, glorious steeple pointing to the heavens. located in that extremely pricey and expensive downtown historic Charleston quarter, and the only major downtown property that is completely owned by Black people, Emmanuel. It was in that place on that night, Wednesday, June 17th, while the pastor and the members gathered for Bible study and prayer, that Dylan Roof, a white 20-year-old, mentally disturbed and yet deeply racist-infested young man, entered in and then indescribably violated its holy ground. And by viciously intruding on their prayer meeting, where Pastor Pinckney and the members welcomed him as a brother and a child of God, by committing the worst of violence to a people who had gathered just to pray, by showing the most deplorable of evils in a space where God dwells, this young man who grew up learning how to hate based on race poignantly reminded us that Barack Obama's America, that Oprah Winfrey's America, that Shonda Rhimes' America, that fictitious Kerry Washington and Olivia Pope's America, that Serena and Venus Williams' America, and despite his enduring denial, that a Ben Carson's America is an America that is still potently poisoned and polluted with deep racism. That evening in 2015, the long reminded us that the long road towards racial justice still takes detours. That there are still many, perhaps by the millions, of Americans, white Americans, sons and daughters of European immigrants who are still walking around insanely believing that Black and brown people have taken away their country, and that they want their country and their land back, a land that they themselves have stripped and stolen from indigenous people. And yes, so after the tragic incident, there was for a few days this outpouring of rage, outrage against this monstrous violence from all races. Yes, there were the religious leaders, even from the white Bible Belt colleges, that stood up and condemned it. And I'm so glad they did. But did they have a choice? For to not decry this brutal act of mass murders in the holiest of places would indict the very holiness and sincerity of their own houses of worship. And yes, there were responses from the Southern and far-right politicians. Yes, there were the calls by some of them to remove the Confederate flag, the very symbol of deep-seated racism that had flown over the state houses. And I'm so glad they did. But did they really have a choice? When Dylan Roof made it so blatantly clear that his inspiration to go in and kill the congregants at Emmanuel Church was largely driven by his reverence and his veneration of the Confederate flag? Yes, after years of stubbornly and proudly flying the Confederate flag as their response to the civil rights movement, they had to now take it down. Because to keep it flying was to, even at the very least, imply a subtle gesture of solidarity with the savage acts taken by Dylan Roof. But you know, and I know, we all know, that symbolic responses such as denouncing the killings and taking down of a flag does not by any means wipe away racism and usher in true racial justice. And so here is the question that even 4 months later we need to be asked: what must we do as a people who deeply care about justice and improving social conditions of the oppressed, especially in the urban environment? Yes, what must we do as social workers and as change agents and as community transformers in response to the Emmanuel Church tragedy? It's 4 months later, but we still have to do something. We are hundreds and hundreds of miles away from Charleston, but we still have to do something. So many other tragedies have transpired since then, including more mass killings, but we still have to do something about the Emmanuel Church massacre. Otherwise, it will happen again and again and again until, God forbid, we become numb to it. And when that happens, we lose all grace of our humanity. And so I'm glad that you've convened this bearing witness event. I'm glad that even after 4 months of its occurrence, you have gathered to provide a welcoming space for you to come and deeply reflect on this tragedy. And I deeply commend you, and I'm excited that you're doing this because, sadly, the rest of America in many ways has moved on. Our nation is no longer talking about it, no longer reflecting on it. Our country seems to have only the will or the capacity to deal only with that monster of the day, that atrocity of the hour, that tragedy of the given news cycle of a few days where the cable networks will devote around-the-clock coverage up until the next tragedy occurs. And with all the succeeding layers of mass violence that unfortunately have emerged and developed, it has become convenient and easy for America to have moved on and to have forgotten about the previous one or the previous one. Just as I confessed as it was for me, even as a pastor of a historic A.M.E. church, even as a pastor of another Mother A.M.E. church of a region, even as someone who knew two of the victims, even I, a few days ago, attempting to reflect on that June 17th tragedy, I had a challenging time in mentally getting past and weaving through the many other tragedies that occurred since June 17th. But still, we must do something in response to the senseless killings of Emanuel 9. And it has to go deeper, and it has to go beyond the gathering of even this bearing witness event. And it cannot just be one action or one strategy. And there is no one-size-fits-all response for all of us. Each of us, as students pursuing a Master of Divinity, as doctoral students pursuing your terminal degrees in this incredibly important field, each of us has to figure out what sustainable action, what effort for the long haul and continual stride has his name on it. Just as long as its overall mission is to usher in true racial and economic justice. And as long as it is embedded into the work of the goal of eliminating the disparities and closing the gaps between the racial, the ethnic, the gender, and the suburban, urban, and rural divides. One way of responding in an authentic way is to see Emanuel AME Church tragedy in the context of what it really represents. And that is that even today, even as far as we've come in race relations, that there are still people in this country that believe that the lives of black and brown people are dispensable. Even as much as going into a church and killing them as they're praying. The Emanuel AME church tragedy and the response to it must be very much associated and must be contextually connected with the Black Lives Matter movement. And to not do it would to miss the point and shame the tragedy. And if anything, truly bearing witness to the atrocity of the Emmanuel Church massacre means for each of us to rekindle and renew that burning call within us to become relentless and passionate activists for racial and social and economic justice. Social workers are activists by nature. That is the ultimate work and will always be the ultimate work of social workers. That when the other professionals, including sometimes the preachers, when they seem to no longer have the Emanuel 9 tragedy and the other atrocities of racial and other injustices at the fore of their attention, it will always be the social worker activists that boldly and unapologetically step out and speak out and speak truth always to the powers to be and organize and lead and help bring about true systemic and individual change and help transform all oppressive environments and actively demand and actively fight for and actively and diligently see that true racial justice comes so that an Emmanuel Church tragedy will never come again. Thank you.